The heritage of Italian naval special operations in the First World War witnessed a renaissance during the interwar years. The creation of a dedicated special attack unit once again put Italy at the forefront of submarine special operations. By the time war broke out in September 1939, Fascist Italy had joined with Germany in a pact of steel. The 10th Light Flotilla, or Decima Mas, became a covert elite organization, specializing in manned torpedoes and assault frogmen. The Mignata of World War I evolved into the SLC, Siluro a Lenta Corsa, slow-running torpedo, more commonly called the Maiale, or pig, by the crew who manned it. The craft could submerge to a depth of 100 feet for short periods, the two crewmen breathing from a 6-hour supply of bottled oxygen. Having approached a target ship, the single explosive warhead was detached and slung by cables beneath the hull, rather than magnetically attached to it. The time fuse could be delayed for up to 5 hours. The Maiale achieved their greatest success against British warships based in Alexandria, Egypt in December 1941.
Two of the Maiale placed their charges under the battleships Queen Elizabeth and Valiant, and both charges went off. The third placed its charges under the tanker Sagona, which was also damaged. Now, the battleships weren't sunk, but they were incapable of operations for some months.
On the morning after the attack, the commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet made a point of personally taking the salute as the Royal Navy White Ensign was raised aboard the Queen Elizabeth. The spectacle was a public relations ploy for the benefit of the press corps and Axis agents. Queen Elizabeth was actually flooded below decks and resting on the bottom. Meanwhile, the British, having recovered several sunken Maiale from the Mediterranean, had developed their own version of the manned torpedo, called the Chariot. Their primary target was the German battleship Tirpitz, sister of the Bismarck. Referred to as the Beast by Winston Churchill, the Tirpitz was safely ensconced in a Norwegian fjord, posing a constant threat to North Atlantic convoys bringing war material to Russia.
The Chariot, it must be said, didn't do very well in northern waters, largely because it's okay to expect a guy to sit in a wetsuit on one of these things in the Mediterranean, but north of the Arctic Circle, it's a very, very different matter. There was only one Chariot operation against the Tirpitz, and that was in 1942.
On that ill-fated mission, a Norwegian fishing trawler secretly carrying 2 Chariots was engulfed in heavy seas just 9 miles from the Beast's lair. The Chariots broke loose and sank to the bottom. The mission was aborted. But already in development was another means of striking at the Tirpitz, a class of midget submarine that would prove to be one of the most effective weapons ever built for the Royal Navy. They were called X-Craft. The X-Craft was a true submarine, diving to more than 300 feet for up to 12 hours, a limit imposed by carbon monoxide buildup. It carried a crew of 4, 3 to operate the boat and a diver, equipped with breathing apparatus, who exited and entered through a so-called wet-dry chamber. X-Craft did not carry torpedoes as in conventional submarines, but rather 2 detachable side cargoes, each consisting of a time-delayed 2-ton explosive charge.
The principle was that you went under the bow of your target, dropped one side cargo, then went round under the stern and dropped the other side cargo, and these exploding would break the back of the ship.
On September 11th, 1943, 6 X-Craft departed their base in northwest Scotland, each towed behind a mother submarine, destination Norway, and the Tirpitz. The mission was called Operation Source. By the time the X-craft arrived in attack position in the early hours of September 22nd, the treacherous sea had exacted a heavy toll on the small boats.
Of the 6, 2 were lost on the voyage out. 1 simply disappeared. 1 had a series of mechanical breakdowns and returned. However, 2 of the craft did reach the Tirpitz. They successfully manoeuvred underneath her and left their side cargoes, which duly detonated. However, both craft were later detected and sunk.
For the price of 9 men killed and 6 taken prisoner, the Tirpitz was so heavily damaged that she was put out of action for more than 7 months. Operation Source would be recognized as one of the most daring and successful special operations in the history of naval warfare. Specially modified X-craft were also used in the war against Japan. 20-year-old Bill Morrison was anxiously preparing to take one of the new X-craft to the Pacific as second in command. On the morning of March 6, 1945, a routine training dive in a Scottish loch turned into a terrifying ordeal that disrupted those plans and came within a breath of taking his life. While conducting depth gauge calibrations, Morris's craft, the XE11, had unwittingly drifted from her practice area. Nearby, a harbor defense ship had been laying a buoy. The vessel's engines were stopped. There was no audible warning of its presence to the 5-man crew of the XE11 as it surfaced. Only moments before, by pure luck, Morrison had received permission to go forward to the XE11's wet, dry chamber, because that was where the toilet was.
There was an engine starting up of a boat. At that 1,000,000 to 1 minute and chance, she had finished her job, started up her engine, and her propeller ripped a huge hole in her pressure hull. And a column of water about 12 inches broad came cascading into the control room. I was in the escape chamber. The captain shouted to me, "Open the hatch and get out, Bill. I'm going to break surface. We'll all scramble out."
But the XE11 was flooding too fast. Stern down, the craft plunged deeper and deeper. The electrical fuses blew. Darkness enveloped the crew.
We were fast becoming almost perpendicular, and I couldn't open the hatch. Was forcing it with my head and shoulders with all my strength. Couldn't open it against the pressure of water. And the air that was left in the escape chamber was slowly being compressed, and I was breathing my last, keeping my head and mouth in this air pocket, breathing. When suddenly we hit bottom, leveled out, and the hatch, I had the clips off, the hatch automatically opened, and I was shot up in this bubble of air. I then tried to grab someone else from the control room, but couldn't get hold of anyone, and then shot up myself. That's all I remember, because I remember trying to hold my breath and being in great pain with the pressure of the air that was in my lungs, trying to hold it, and I should have been releasing it slowly, but I tried to hold it. That's when I went unconscious. The next thing I remember was that I came to about 3/4 of an hour later on the deck of the ship that sunk us, being given artificial respiration.
Morrison and a petty officer named Swatton were the only 2 survivors of the XE11. They had extricated themselves from a watery tomb 210 feet below the surface.
30 years later, 1973, it was established by the Royal Navy and the Guinness Book of Records as a world record for an escape from a sunken submarine without escape apparatus, what they call a free ascent.
The irony of Bill Morrison's near-death experience does not end with a fortuitous toilet break. An old sailor's custom holds that no ship or boat should be named after the devil. Morrison's commander had challenged that convention when he named the XE11 Lucifer. When informed of the lieutenant's decision, a grizzled petty officer's only comment was, "No good will come of it."